All right. A little late getting this one recorded. Just I had a bit of a busy end to the week. But I just wanted to go over week 5, how I made with my progress. Um, Unfortunately, I didn't get the Basic09 development side of things quite the way that I wanted, so I'll be working on that again next week. But I did make a few things. So why don't I just kind of go? I'm starting with my commits on my retro meme developer GitHub project. Again, link in the description below. Um, Actually, I'm gonna come back to this, but I did have a bunch of week 5 changes. So here, I added in. Oh, I added a get ignored because my build process creates this build basic folder in the project files when I do my transpile process using awk. So just to kind of recap where I left off last week, is I had gotten I got in Gemini to do a full rewrite of the awk script to add in a whole bunch of features that I covered last week for the transpiling process to sort of give some more additional syntactic sugar, just so I can write a little more modern than Basic09 basic, sort of a meta basic, I've been calling it, that then transpiles into true Basic09 code that can run on the Cocoa 3. Well, the one thing I didn't get to do last week was test that. And in the testing of this week, I discovered there were a few errors. So that's the bulk of what is committed into into this process. Huh. That must be anyway. So let's see. I added in into the basic reference. I added. So this is kind of. Let me go back to the beginning. So at the beginning of week 5, before going and actually testing my code, I started to work with Gemini to try to re-implement the same functionality that I had done in awk in Basic09 to sort of replace the Basic09 script the transpile.bo9 file that I had written a couple of weeks ago. Well, me and the model. And it kept making, even with the modifications to my best practices and some extra documentation and that I had added in, it was still doing a few things that that just weren't proper Basic09. It was one of the things that it was doing was it was referencing something called L trim and maybe R trim to do a left side of the string white space trim or right side of the space white space trim, which doesn't exist in Basic09. There is a trim, which I believe trims off both the left and the right. I'm pretty sure that's what it does anyway. But it wasn't referencing that. So one of the things that I got the model to generate for me was another procedure to add to my basic reference that'll go into all my new prompts that explicitly spells out the only string functions that are available in Basic09. So that particularly is CHR, which converts an integer into an ASCII character. There's date, which gets the current date and time in a string format. There's left, right, and mid-dollar string functions, which will give you the left, essentially a splice of the left end of the string, right end of the string, or somewhere in the middle, respectively, for those 3 calls. There's also an str string, which converts a number into a string, which takes an actual number value and makes it into a string value. And then trim, which removes white spaces. Like I said, I'm pretty sure it's on both sides of the string, and I do have it so that it does put a little extra white space on both, and then prints out the original string, and then trims it, and then prints out the next string. Oh, not sure why I've got extra white space in there, but whatever. So that got added into the basic reference. I'm going to do, actually I think I did do the same thing for file I/O as well, or at least in a specific part of the file I/O, because that's the other thing that it still seems to get messed up with. And then I also made some changes. Oh, I checked in. Let me go back here. Do I have... Yeah, so there was this. I checked in this, which was the first pass at the transpile. I called it new transpile.b09 to not replace the other one until I get it working, but I will eventually replace the old one with the new one. But I just wanted to I gave it the exact same, and I'll go to the Gemini in a little bit here, but I gave it the exact same prompt, and with a slight tweak to say that you're writing Basic09 versus awk, to say to execute this new transpile documentation into a Basic09 script. And this is the first thing that it gave me, and there's a number of errors in here, so I'm not going to go into it. So that second check-in here on the week 5 changes, I started making some tweaks. So for instance, it had both one of the types had a property called name, but there was also a variable, like a dimension variable called name dollar. And again, in Basic09, you can't have not just variables, but also type attributes all have to be unique within the same procedure. You can't have that same name shared between a variable and a type attribute. So that's what that fix was for. Another, I added in some, I moved this up because this should have been done above the create call. It was put below. Here's that L trim, so I just replaced it with the trim string. And then here you see a reference to that same name that I switched to the label name as part of the type attribute name. And, here it was, so this is the other thing it was trying to do. Because in print statements, if you're having multiple either strings or variables getting all sort of added into one big print, the separator for that, at least my understanding, is the semicolon. It interpreted that as that's how you concatenate strings and variables even in variable assignments like this, in this expression. So it had put in these semicolons, which is not valid syntax, so I replaced them with pluses. And then, here I just expanded these. So it had done a bunch of if, thens, and then didn't do an end if at the end, so I made them a little more, I didn't all in one line kind of things. It was trying to do two things here as well, so I just made it a little more verbose and multi-line and added an end if on the end of each one of these just to make it more clear. Same with the strings. I think that's pretty much all the changes that I made here. Here I just renamed the end of line because this is, I think, is a separate procedure. I'm using 900 as my default error handling go-to line for all procedures unless it's already being used further up. And then, and I think that's mostly it. So here, that got renamed to 900. And then I added a bootstrap function because I was trying to test just the low global definitions thing. So one of the things that it did do is that it actually created, instead of putting everything in one big transpile function, it created a low global definitions procedure that would go, so again, remember the big change for the last time I did this transpile process was I had types in their types, variables, and constants in their own separate sort of global B09 files. I've now amalgamated all that into a single global .b09 file. When it did the first pass on this, it did create a load global definitions procedure that goes to that globals file and then loads up all the types, constants, and variables and puts them into an in-memory array, so that when it goes through and does the transpile on a given source file, it has all that in reference at hand. And then, there was a bug. It shouldn't be d1/build. It should just be output. So I was trying my bootstrap for my transpile process as far as testing goes. The other thing that I added was this Basic09 error handling document, which was something that I got recommended by the model when I was trying to say you keep making a lot of mistakes with the error handling in particular. And it suggested having a special document for just error handling. I may fold this into the best practices at some point, and I haven't really edited this beyond what the model generated, so I think it's all accurate, but it's also not as concise or as precise as I want in certain things. But anyway, that's the other big addition. And then I made some tweaks to the best practices document again, because even after I gave it a best practices, it was doing a few things that, even though I was explicitly telling it not to do, it kept doing this. So I asked for it to. Is there anything that's a little too vague in my descriptions, in my best practices document, that may be contributing to the fact that I kept making these mistakes? And so it suggested rewriting a few of them. I think that's what these are. I also did a couple of tweaks here in a couple of things that Wayne did on his video from a week or two back now, where he was sort of responding to some of this work that I've been doing and going over some of the the things that I wasn't quite getting right with Basic09, and he was graceful enough to send me his notes. So I both reviewing the video and reviewing the notes, I made a couple of tweaks to the language in here, like statement concatenation. So like the backslash separator on a line isn't essentially a trigger to Basic09 to go to a new line. It actually concatenates the two lines on a single Basic09 source line in the editor. So that's just what I added in there. So instead of a new line, which is what it used to say, I changed it to statement, and then I just said it's called statement concatenation. The other thing that I did was modified the length. So I shortened it down to say, try to keep line length to 79. Well, I do say do keep it to 79 if possible. And the maximum number is actually 256. So the line length that I had in here before was not accurate. And 79 characters is a preference just for if you're using the Basic09 editor. It has difficulty in displaying any content after the 79th character on a line, so that's kind of the reason for this. It can support 256, so it will go to that if necessary, but again, just I clean this up and say it's user interface. It's not going to create errors or anything, but it does create some user interface issues. So this got moved down here and rewritten slightly. This is one of, so I think these four are all ones that I got to rewrite for me, just to make it a little more clear. In like one of the things that it was when I was calling things global scope, or maybe I didn't have that in before. Anyway, and then I did some rewrite of the general tips as well. So this is I added in one. This is one that I did find when I got it to do the generation this past week for Basic09 code. It was creating these extremely large arrays, which would not have been capable to fit within the limited amount of memory available for variables in Basic09. Essentially, you've only got about a total of, I think it's a total of 64K of memory available to you to do Basic09 code for an app, for any Basic09 procedure and supporting procedures, and 32 of that is available for memory for variables. So you can't have your total amount of variables declared within a procedure can't go beyond 32K. So that got added in. Line numbering, I added in a better example of how line numbering should work and rewrote this a bit. Same thing with the on-error go-to and on go-sub, their procedure scope. So again, it would try to go go-to or go-sub to a line number that was in another procedure. So that's kind of what this is supposed to help. And then I think everything else is just moving files around. Nothing really on that one. Okay, so then what else did I check in? Here I checked in a few more tweaks. So here, this is where I added in the delete file into the basic reference as well. So now I've also got an example of, and particularly the delete file, I wanted to have an example of it because when you delete a file, it's possible that the file doesn't exist, and so you want to be able to handle that error. And so that's what this is doing. Plus I've also added in the 216 check so say it's file not found, and if it's any other error, it just goes system error and prints out the error code when deleting that file. So just a nice little example. I will probably add on this for more of the file I/O and maybe even just general I/O basic calls, but that's sort of the start of this addition to my basic references, to have more explicit for the. I guess that's sort of one of the things I've decided in this past week was, for some of the code where it does make repeated mistakes, and like I said, string I/O is one, file I/O, string manipulation is one, file I/O is another. I need to be more explicit in this is what's permitted and this is what's not permitted, especially if it's something that it does pretty regularly. But that was what that function's for. And then I added in, this was the other error that I had, was I hadn't migrated all of my types, constants, and variables from those other three files into that global.b09 file. And so the transpile of my basic reference wasn't working when I was trying to test it. I was like, well, all of a sudden it stopped working. I didn't change it. At that point, I hadn't even made any changes to it, I think, and it wasn't working. I was like, it was complaining about label errors, and this is where I discovered issues with the awk code as well. But I also wasn't giving these weren't in here. So anyway, this was part of my code fixing. And then I changed the error code. This was originally in the Basic09 error handling was 210, and that's not the right one. It's 216. I'm not sure. I haven't checked on these two yet, if these are actually accurate. And I might add some more error codes in here, because there are more error codes that are sort of common ones. I'm going to document that in this error handling. And like I said, this may end up just migrating into the best practices document, but for now it's in a separate document for error handling, and I'm attaching both of them in my prompts. And then, just some minor text editing there on those two. And then here I just did a procedure rename, some more tweaks, just put some single quotes around that string value. And I don't think it was the same sort of thing here. I just put a little readme comment at the end of that line to explain that it's the file not found error code inside of my example basic reference. Okay. So, like I said, not a lot of changes, and most of what I did was basically fixing my awk code and my build process so that it's working again. So now, if you do grab the retro MAME developer project and try to build the Nitro OS 9 examples project, it will actually compile and give you the proper, or transpile properly, and give you the actual valid Basic09 code that does run inside of the Cocoa 3. Okay, I think I'll just go to Gemini. The other thing I did try, or did I try that this week? I think that maybe I didn't try it with ChatGPT or Claude. In either case, just to kind of reiterate, like I said, I've been in recent times I've been trying to give the exact same prompt and support files to ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini to just kind of compare the three as far as how they generate code, and Gemini so far has been winning out for me. So not to say that you can't, if you want to try this in ChatGPT or Claude, you might, it will probably work to a lesser degree, but I've just found that Gemini seems to get things more correct more often, and so right now that's my go-to LLM for doing Basic09 code generation specifically. I still use ChatGPT for most of my just general model work, so because I use it for all sorts of different things. But as far as this project is concerned, almost everything is still within Gemini here. Okay, so let me also talk about the other thing that I did this week, which was I came up with the idea of trying to attack this problem from two different approaches. One was I gave it my existing awk code, and again, I gave it the one that wasn't quite right, but the point is moot at this point. I gave it the transpile awk code, and in my instructions here I said I want you to translate the logic from the awk script into Basic09, and I gave it all the same examples about how to write Basic09 code. And then on a separate conversation, I got it to do the same thing. Let me get back up to the top here. But this case, I didn't give it the awk code. I just gave it the requirements that I gave Gemini last week to do the awk code, but without the actual example. I gave it, in fact, the original transpile source code from the previous iteration as the example, along with best practices, and just to see what the difference was. So one conversation, it was trying to translate logic from a different programming language, in this case awk, to Basic09, and in this one I gave it just the requirements of what I want the Basic09 code to do, and told it to write the Basic09 code essentially from scratch, although again giving it the example code for Basic09, so give it at least a bit of a heads up. And so unexpectedly for me, but I guess thinking about it now, it kind of makes sense. It is definitely a better solution to just give it the requirements and teach it how to write Basic09 code, rather than try to translate the logic from another language, especially, this is probably true with almost every language, but especially any language that has sort of more modern features or even deals with scope in a very different way. It tried to write essentially the awk logic, but because Basic09 is so different, it really didn't work. It was really wrong. And the other thing this is where I got the inspiration to, because like you can see here, look, an array of 100 of string 20, an array of 100 of string 80. So it created all these arrays of 100 size arrays. This definitely would have broken the 32K. But it tried to mimic the logic the way that awk does it, and that was definitely a no-go. So that was a learning lesson for me, was if you're trying to get it to write Basic09 code, just give it the requirements and teach it how to write proper Basic09, and you'll get much more success than if you're trying to get something that was written in another language and try to get it to do the conversion. That you're going to get a lot of really bad errors. So anyway, okay, let me get to the top here. So, this was the other thing that I got. I was using, and for some reason, let me see if I go to new chat here. Oh, there it is, deep research. This is something I hadn't used before. I'm not even sure if it was available here before. If it was, I just never noticed it. But when you turn on deep research, because everything I've been doing up to this point was just plain old, plain Jane Gemini chat, attaching my files and getting it to do stuff. Deep research is something that if you're on the free plan, you are limited to, I'm trying to remember how many were, at most about a dozen runs with deep research, I think, something like that. It's a very low number, so it's not something you can use for repeatedly, as much as you want, at least on the free. I imagine if you go to the paid plan, you probably have access to deep research with a lot more uses. But I noticed it, so I thought, when I'm doing these two code translates, I turned on deep research. And so when I told it to, why don't I read through the instructions, first part of the instructions here. So I wanted it to write a transpiler process written in Basic09 that accepts a source file path string, a target file path string, and a global file path string for a file called global.b09, containing types, constants, and variables available to all modules in a given project. This process starts by parsing the global file and collects the types, constants, and variables into an in-memory structure of matching tokens, token types, and replacement lines. It then reads each line of the source file in sequence and performs the transpiling actions described at the end of this prompt. So that's everything from here on down. I'm attaching the best practices for writing Basic09 code in the bestpractices.txt doc, so that's that there. Please follow those instructions strictly as you convert the logic. You can create multiple procedure blocks in a single module file, with a transpile procedure being the point of entry that accepts the 3 input variables. I'm also attaching transpile.txt, which includes a working Basic09 transpile module from a previous iteration of this project. Use this reference template for your generated code. So I gave it the original This is the source code for the original transpile code, here. And the best practices document here, close that up. I don't like how it keeps scrolling to the bottom. Anyway, and then the best practices is that big doc again, where I've got all my do's and don'ts and general tips and some source code examples for some of the stuff that I wanted to prevent it from doing repeatedly. Okay, so then I gave it that, and again, there's all the examples of what I want the requirements to do. I won't go over this again because I've gone over it in a previous video. So then it did this. So it did a transpiler implementation plan. And does it say... Okay, so here's what it says it was going to do. Analyze the best practices TXT to identify all guidelines for writing Basic09 code, focusing on structured programming, variable definitions, error handling, and file I/O practices. Analyze the transpile reference to understand the existing structure for loading definitions and processing source files. Develop a plan to load and store definitions from both the provided global 09 and the module level declarations of the source file, taking into account the specified precedence rules. Procedure takes precedence over module, takes precedence over global. So again, if you find the same definition for a type or a variable or a constant in the procedure, it overrides whatever's in the module. So module is in the same source file but outside of the procedure. So I've added a module and module syntax to my meta so that I can declare types, constants, and variables inside of that module that applies to every procedure in that module. Essentially the text file. Outline the process for reading the source file line by line, identifying, so it's basically breaking down the entire requirements, and I think it does it pretty accurately here. And again, you can pause this and read the whole thing if you want to. And then it analyzes the results and creates a report. So then it generated this. So this is the big difference. But when you use deep research, it will actually generate report documents that are quite professionally well written, I think. And again, it does an executive summary talking about what it's doing. Then it talks about the transpiler architecture. So it's doing a 2-pass model. So single pass to identify tokens and looking for all the different sort of meta language we wanted to add in here, and then it'll do a second pass to do the actual transpiling. So the analysis and symbol table construction, so it's going through the file once to pull all the data out, and then doing a transform and code generation. Now, the one thing that it does do here in the code that, again, so this code's not working right now, and one of the reasons why is what it does is it reads the entire source file into memory in a big array, and then the second pass it'll just iterate through that array row by row, which is essentially line by line in the file. That's probably, especially for any sort of source file that gets to any sort of length, is going to also blow out the memory restriction. So I'm going to have to get it on my this next week to do a first pass of opening the file, reading all the way through and closing it, and only pulling out the stuff that it needs, and then reopen that file, start at the top again, and then go through and do the actual transpile. So it doesn't take the entire source code, doesn't put the entire source code listing in memory in addition to all the other stuff that it needs. But that's essentially what it decided to do, was a two pass, and explains why, and it goes into really, like I said, this is quite a good document. So another thing I'll do next week, I have taken this, and I've taken a couple of the others that I was testing with and put them into Google Docs, but I haven't gotten them into my repo yet. I'll take this out and put it into the repository somewhere for next week. But I just wanted to kind of show this off because I thought this is a really interesting addition to the functionality, this deep research function inside of Gemini, where it actually, instead of just doing the action that I wanted, it goes through and builds a big document saying, here's what I'm going to do, and then sometimes it actually does generate the full source code inside of this document. It didn't do it on this pass, I don't think. And then it also gives you, I found this kind of interesting too, it actually gives you, here's the thought. So this is where it does its initial research, does this analysis, next steps, and then it goes and looks through the two files and takes out the foundational knowledge, identifies and resolves complexities, and then it researches, goes back to the transpile, and then looks at it, synthesize and complete transpile algorithm, and so on and so forth. So anyway, it did this implementation plan, and then I said, if you're ready to produce the final product, please do so. And then it did that, and it generated source code. So I do think, and this is because I've only done this 1 week, I'm not as I still need to kind of play with this a little more to really get a feel for how much of an advantage this is by using deep research. But at least that's my impression right now, is that I think I got better results by having deep research turned on, because it went through more of a thoughtful process in analyzing my request and breaking that down into the steps that are needed to really think as a developer, essentially. And then it gave me my report, and then when I was happy with it, like I said, it looked good enough. I don't think I was too thorough, because I was, I'm experimenting. This isn't a completed workflow. It's more sort of discovery for me right now. But long story short, highly recommend playing around with deep research if you're using Gemini. And again, Gemini's free. You just have to link it to either your Google account, or you could probably create a special account for this if you want. Because it works. I got some really interesting. That was the biggest lesson this past week was, I'm going to play more with this, because I found some really satisfying results using deep research. And then I kind of worked through with it to try and figure out that it did have some issues with the code, like the global error handling. This is where, again, this is where I discovered that it was trying to call an error handler in a line number that was in a completely different procedure, because it was thinking that any called procedure would be able to access error handling in parent procedures, essentially, in the calling procedure, which is definitely not legal. But again, it's getting this concept from a more modern language where errors bubble up in a different way than they do inside of Basic09. So anyway, a lot of the reason for why it did that sort of thing was, I think, because I wasn't using terminology that it understood, that it could understand that Basic09 doesn't do error handling quite the same way that like a modern programming language does. It's just a little bit different. Anyway, I think that's all I'm going to do today. I just kind of wanted to give you an update on where I am, where I've gotten to. Like I said, my awk script, at least from last week, is fully working now, and that code is now properly functioning. But my goal now this week is the same as what it was last week, which is get the Basic09 version working. And so I'm going to probably do some revisions to my basic reference file to try and add in some more explicit code samples of best practices for how it writes things like file I/O and error handling maybe too. And also look at revising my best practices document to maybe also add in some more text there. And then I'm going to go and take that and do another pass with Gemini and see where I get. So anyway, that's enough for today, and I will wrap it up there. So thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.